Screams echoed through the damp dungeon walls as the iron lid clamped shut, sealing a man inside a cramped metal box, barely larger than his body. Welcome to the chilling tale of the coffin torture, where victims rotted alive in their own filth, begging for death that never came. Swiftly drop a comment below letting us know where you're watching from, whether it's a cozy living room or a late night scroll in the shadowy underbelly of medieval Europe. Torture wasn't just punishment. It was an art form designed to break the spirit and extract confessions from the unwilling. The coffin torture, often called the iron coffin or metal sarcophagus, stood as one of the most insidious devices in the Inquisitor's arsenal. Picture a narrow upright box forged from cold iron, just wide enough for a person to stand, but too tight to sit or lie down. Victims were stripped naked and forced inside their arms pinned to their sides, and the heavy door bolted shut, leaving them in utter darkness. Air holes were minimal, sometimes just slits near the face, barely enough to breathe, but perfect for letting in the stench of decay. This wasn't a quick death, it was a slow, agonizing descent into madness. Historical records from the Spanish Inquisition detail how heretics and witches endured this for days or even weeks, their bodies wasting away from starvation, dehydration, and infection. One infamous case involved an accused sorcerer in 15th century Germany who lasted 12 days screaming until his voice gave out, his skin rotting from sores caused by constant pressure against the metal. To make it worse, torturers would sometimes heat the coffin from outside, turning it into a blistering oven, or pour in insects to crawl over the trapped soul. Practical tip for understanding this horror's impact: think about how confinement affects the mind. Today, modern studies on solitary confinement show similar effects, like hallucinations and despair, amplifying why this method was so effective. As the victim's pleas faded, the device served not only to punish but to terrify others into obedience. Examples abound in old texts like the Malleus Maleficarum, which describes such tools to root out evil. Wrapping this up, the coffin torture's origins trace back to ancient times, but peaked in the Middle Ages, setting the stage for even darker evolutions in punishment methods. The real genius of the coffin lay in its simplicity: no gears, no blades, just metal and time. Once the prisoner was locked inside, the world outside vanished, and the body became its own enemy. Sweat poured from every pore, mixing with blood from scrapes against the rough inner walls, creating a slick film that invited infection. Without room to move, muscles cramped into knots within hours, and the spine curved forward until bones ground together. Urine and feces had nowhere to go, pooling at the feet, then rising inch by inch as days passed, turning the lower legs into swollen purple stumps. Flies found the air slits, laying eggs in open wounds, so maggots hatched and feasted while the victim still breathed. A French chronicle from 1423 tells of a thief named Jean who survived 9 days, his tongue so swollen from thirst it split when he tried to scream for water. Guards outside placed bets on how long each man would last, marking tallies on the dungeon wall. Some torturers drilled tiny holes and inserted thin iron rods to prod the flesh, keeping the prisoner awake and alert to every sensation. Others poured vinegar through the slits to sting the sores, or sprinkled salt to draw screams that echoed like music in the stone corridors. Modern forensic pathology explains why death came slowly. The heart kept pumping, even as kidneys failed, and toxins built up in the blood, leading to delirium, then coma. One Spanish record notes a woman accused of adultery, who began laughing hysterically on day 7, convinced the metal walls whispered secrets only she could hear. Her corpse, when finally removed, was folded at the waist, the knees locked upward from rigor that set in while she still stood. The stench lingered for weeks, forcing new prisoners to smell what awaited them. This slow rot was the point. Fear spread faster than any plague, and villages emptied of dissent overnight. Not every coffin stood in a dungeon, some rolled through city streets on market day. In 16th century Flanders, the local executioner built a portable version on wheels, a narrow iron cage just tall enough for a kneeling man. Crowds gathered as the condemned was marched in chains to the town square, stripped and shoved inside. face first, so the public could watch every twitch. The door slammed, and the cart lurched forward, pulled by a single horse, while children threw rotten fruit through the bars. The journey lasted hours, sometimes days, from one village to the next, giving every soul a close look at the punishment for blasphemy or treason. A Dutch merchant diary from 1574 describes a Protestant preacher dragged behind the cart, his knees scraping the dirt road until the skin peeled away in sheets. When the procession stopped for the night, the coffin was propped upright against the church wall and left in the rain. Water trickled through the seams, soaking the prisoner and chilling the bones until fever set in. Guards took turns reading Bible verses aloud, mocking the man who once preached them. In Scotland, a similar device called the Iron Shroud was used on Covenanters rebels who refused to swear loyalty to the king. One named Margaret lasted 11 days, her lips cracked and bleeding as she whispered psalms between coughs of blood. The crowd grew bored and drifted away, leaving only the ravens to peck at fingers poking through the bars. Forensic clues from exhumed remains show teeth marks on the inner walls, where victims gnawed the metal in desperation. Some coffins had a small shelf at chest height, holding a crust of bread or a cup of water just out of reach, a cruel tease that kept hope alive long enough to deepen despair. Records from Prague list a Jesuit priest who clawed his own eyes out on day 6, unable to bear the darkness any longer. The coffin on wheels turned justice into theatre, and every mile stretched the suffering into a public lesson no one could ignore. Step into the mind of the condemned, and the clock starts ticking the moment the iron lid seals. The first hour feels like a mistake. The air is thick but breathable, the body still strong enough to push against the walls, testing for weakness. Fingers scrape the seams, searching for a loose rivet, a hidden latch, anything to pry open and escape. Metal tastes of rust and old blood when the tongue presses flat in panic. By hour 3, the shoulders burn from the effort of staying upright and the neck cranes forward to keep the head from slamming the top. A man of average height finds his chin locked against his chest, breathing shallow to avoid the sharp edge that slices the scalp with every jolt. Sweat runs in rivers down the spine, pooling in the small of the back, then trickling between the buttocks to sting the raw skin where the iron bites. The feet swell, first toes turning blue as blood cannot return past the ankles. Blisters form under the armpits where the arms are welded to the ribs, and every heartbeat pushes them against the metal like sandpaper. A Flemish account from 1588 details a baker named Peter, who counted his pulse aloud to stay sane, 1 beat for every second he endured. He reached 4,000 before the numbers blurred, and he began reciting recipes. Instead, yeast water, flour, salt, yeast, water, flour, salt, until the words lost meaning. Guards outside heard the chant through the air slits and laughed, betting on when the recipe would turn to prayer. On the second day, thirst becomes a living thing crawling up the throat. The mouth fills with cotton, the tongue sticks to the palate, and swallowing feels like gulping gravel. Some prisoners lick the condensation that beads on the inner walls, a salty film mixed with flakes of rust that slice the lips. Urine darkens to the color of strong tea, and the smell rises sharp and acrid, burning the nostrils. When the bladder empties, it splashes the shins and cools, instantly turning the legs to ice. Flies enter through the slits at dawn, laying eggs in the folds of skin behind the knees. By dusk the eggs hatch and the maggots wriggle white and fat against blackening flesh. The itch is unbearable, but the arms cannot reach the legs, cannot kick. A Venetian inquisitor noted that victims often rubbed their backs against the rear wall, trying to crush the insects, only smearing the larvae deeper into the wounds. Sleep comes in fragments, standing up impossible to achieve. The head nods forward, then jerks back, slamming the skull against iron. Concussions build layer by layer until blood trickles from the ears. Hallucinations arrive on the third night, faces in the darkness. Voices of children calling from the slits, promises of water if the prisoner will just confess. One English record tells of a highwayman who swore he saw his mother holding a jug just beyond the bars, her face melting into the metal as he reached for it. The mind fractures into pieces, some beg, some bargain, some simply shut down. By day 5, the skin splits along the spine from constant pressure and pus seeps out yellow and foul. The coffin becomes a stew of bodily fluids, warm during the day, freezing at night. Toenails lift from their beds and fall into the sludge below. Breathing turns to gasps, each inhale a knife in the ribs. A German physician who examined a survivor after 8 days found the lungs collapsed like punctured bellows, the heart enlarged and fluttering. Death usually claims the victim between the 7th and 10th day, though records exist of a Spanish muleteer who clung to life for 15, his body reduced to bones wrapped in parchment skin. When the lid finally opens, the corpse does not fall. It stands rigid, held by the coffin itself, joints fused muscles, atrophied into the shape of the box. Undertakers break the limbs with hammers to fit the body into a regular grave. The iron coffin never needs cleaning. The next prisoner scrubs away the remnants with his own skin. The coffin torture faded from official use by the late 1700s, when Enlightenment thinkers branded it barbaric, yet its shadow lingers in every cramped cell and isolation box we still build. Prisons in 19th century America adopted the silent system, where inmates stood in narrow stalls for 16 hours a day, unable to speak or turn the same posture that broke medieval spines. In 1890, a Pennsylvania warden revived the iron coffin for a murderer named Holmes, who lasted 4 days before chewing through his own wrist to end it. Photographs from the early 1900s show Chinese water torture cells, narrow wooden crates, where prisoners stood ankle-deep in rising water until madness took them. Modern solitary confinement replicates the recipe: darkness, silence, immobility. United Nations report labels more than 15 days in such conditions as torture because the brain begins to eat itself, producing the same hallucinations and self-harm seen in iron coffins 5 centuries earlier. Survivors describe time folding in on itself, days measured by the drip of sweat or the crawl of a single ant across the wall. One California inmate in a 6x9 cell carved the date into his arm with a fingernail every morning for 3 years. The scars a living calendar. Forensic psychologists now map the stages: thirst on day 1, panic on day 2, bargaining on day 3, surrender on day 4. Death arrives quietly, the heart simply stops between one shallow breath and the next. Yet the coffin's true legacy is not the corpse, it is the fear it plants in every witness. Villages that watched the rolling cage emptied of rebellion overnight. Today, a single leaked video of a restraint chair can silence a prison wing for weeks. The device needed no blades or fire, only the promise that any body can be reduced to meat and memory, in a box too small for hope. Walk past an abandoned jail, and you may still find rusted plates bolted to the floor, the footprint of a coffin long removed. Touch the metal and feel the cold travel up your arm, a reminder that cruelty evolves, but never dies. It waits patient as iron for the next era that decides some crimes deserve to be felt, one slow second at a time. Like this journey into the dark heart of punishment, and subscribe for more stories that history tried to bury. Your support keeps the truth alive.